At my aunt's retirement party, I said. I'll bring dessert to the family barbecue tomorrow. My nephew laughed. Oh, you weren't invited. My cousin smirked. It's kind of a close family thing. I just nodded, left without a word, and canceled the venue they forgot I paid for. I, 32M, stood in my aunt's backyard, holding a glass of cheap wine and watching 3 generations of my family pretend everything was normal. The retirement party was winding down, paper plates scattered across folding tables, and my cousin was already talking about tomorrow's barbecue like it was the social event of the century. I mentioned I'd bring dessert to the family barbecue, thinking it was just another one of our regular gatherings. That's when my nephew started laughing. Not the good kind of laughter you hear at family events, but the cruel kind that cuts right through you. He told me I wasn't invited, his voice dripping with amusement like he'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. My cousin jumped in with that smirk I'd seen too many times growing up, explaining it was kind of a close family thing. The words hit differently coming from someone I'd considered family my entire life. I just nodded, set down my wine glass, and walked out without another word. The drive home felt longer than usual. 23 years of family memories played through my head like a broken movie reel. Every birthday, every holiday, every time I dropped everything to help when someone needed it. I thought about the countless hours I'd spent organizing family events, the money I'd lent that never got paid back, the times I'd been the reliable one while everyone else flaked out. But mostly, I thought about the venue contract sitting in my home office filing cabinet. 3 months earlier, my aunt had asked me to handle the venue booking for her retirement party. She wanted something special, she said, somewhere the whole family could gather and celebrate properly. I'd spent weeks researching locations, comparing prices, and negotiating with vendors. When I found the perfect spot, a beautiful garden venue with catering included, I put down my credit card without hesitation. The family barbecue was supposed to be the continuation of the celebration, a more casual follow-up to the retirement party. Same venue, same booking, just a different menu. I'd arranged everything, from the sound system to the decorations, even coordinated with 3 different caterers to make sure we had options for everyone's dietary restrictions. I sat in my car outside the venue Monday morning, phone in hand, staring at the contact number I'd called so many times over the past few months. The event coordinator answered on the second ring, her cheerful voice asking how she could help with tomorrow's event. I told her I needed to cancel everything. She expressed concern, asking if there was a problem with the facility or if we needed to reschedule. I explained that there had been a change in plans, keeping my voice steady and professional. She mentioned the cancellation policy, but when I told her to go ahead and process the full cancellation, she seemed surprised that I wasn't trying to negotiate a partial refund. The financial hit was significant, nearly $8,000 down the drain between the venue, catering, and decorations. But sitting there in that parking lot, I realized it was the best money I'd ever spent. I drove home and went about my week normally. Work, gym, grocery shopping, the usual routine. I didn't check my phone obsessively or wonder what they were thinking. I just lived my life like nothing had happened. Update 1. Tuesday afternoon brought the first wave of panic. My cousin called around noon, her voice tight with barely controlled hysteria. She'd arrived at the venue to start setting up and found the gates locked, with a sign directing all inquiries to the main office. The event coordinator had informed her that the reservation had been canceled by the person who made it. I let her explain the whole situation before calmly confirming that yes, I had canceled the event. She demanded to know why, her voice climbing higher with each word. I reminded her of Sunday night's conversation, specifically the part where she'd made it clear this was a close family thing and I wasn't considered close family. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her tone had completely changed. She tried to backtrack, claiming it had all been a misunderstanding, that of course I was invited, that she'd just been stressed about the planning. I told her I understood completely and that she was welcome to plan whatever kind of close family gathering she wanted. I mentioned that since it was such a personal, intimate affair, it would probably be better handled by actual close family members anyway. Then I wished her the best of luck with the arrangements and hung up. My phone started ringing immediately. First my nephew, then my uncle, then my aunt herself. I let them all go to voicemail while I made myself dinner and watched a movie. The voicemails painted an interesting picture of escalating desperation as the reality of their situation set in. My nephew's message was angry, accusing me of ruining everything out of spite. My uncle tried the guilt approach, reminding me of all the family traditions and how disappointed everyone would be. My aunt's message was the most interesting. She actually seemed to understand what had happened, though she stopped short of apologizing. By Wednesday morning, the story had spread through the extended family network. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in months. Some were angry, some were confused, and a few seemed genuinely curious about what had really happened. The most revealing conversation was with my grandmother. She called Wednesday evening, her voice tired and disappointed. Not with me, she clarified, but with the whole situation. She'd been looking forward to the barbecue, she said, and couldn't understand why her family was acting like children. I told her I'd be happy to take her out for lunch instead, just the two of us. She accepted immediately, and we made plans for Saturday. It turned out to be one of the best conversations we'd had in years. Update 2. The weekend brought unexpected developments. Saturday morning, while I was having lunch with my grandmother, my cousin showed up at the restaurant. She'd apparently been driving around looking for me, which struck me as both desperate and slightly concerning. She approached our table with the kind of forced smile people use when they're trying to appear reasonable while falling apart inside. She apologized to my grandmother for interrupting and asked if we could talk privately. I told her we could talk right there. If she had something to say, she could say it in front of the woman who'd raised half our family. The facade cracked almost immediately. She launched into a speech about family loyalty and how my actions had hurt everyone, especially my aunt. She claimed I'd ruined what was supposed to be a beautiful celebration and that people were taking sides. The family was fracturing, she said, and it was all my fault. My grandmother listened quietly until my cousin finished her rant. Then, in the voice that had disciplined 3 generations of children, she asked one simple question. Why hadn't they invited me in the first place? The silence was deafening. My cousin stumbled through several non-answers before finally admitting that some family members had suggested keeping the gathering smaller. She didn't specify who had made that suggestion, but her inability to meet my grandmother's eyes was telling. My grandmother nodded slowly and told my cousin that maybe next time they should think about who they consider family before they start making plans. She suggested that my cousin might want to spend some time reflecting on what family actually means. After my cousin left, my grandmother and I finished our lunch in comfortable quiet. As we were leaving, she patted my hand and told me she was proud of how I'd handled the situation. She said it reminded her of something my grandfather might have done, standing up for himself without being cruel about it. That afternoon, I got a text from my aunt asking if we could meet for coffee. Her message was different from the others. No accusations, no manipulation, just a simple request to talk. I agreed to meet her Sunday morning. Update 3. The coffee shop conversation changed everything. My aunt arrived looking older than I'd ever seen her, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. She ordered her coffee and sat down across from me with the careful movements of someone carrying a heavy burden. She didn't start with excuses or accusations. Instead, she told me she'd spent the week thinking about family dynamics and realized things she'd never noticed before. She'd watched me organize events, solve problems, and support family members for over 2 decades, and she'd taken it completely for granted. The retirement party planning had been a perfect example. When she'd asked me to handle the venue, she hadn't just been asking for a favor. She'd been assuming I'd take care of everything because that's what I always did. She'd never even asked what it cost or offered to split the expenses. She told me about the conversations that had led to my exclusion from the barbecue. It hadn't been malicious, she claimed, but it hadn't been innocent either. Some family members had suggested keeping things smaller, more intimate. Others had pointed out that I didn't have kids or a spouse, implying I wouldn't fit the family atmosphere they wanted. The most painful revelation was that no one had defended me. Not one person in that conversation had pointed out that I was family too, that I'd earned my place at that table through years of showing up and supporting everyone else. They'd all just agreed that it made sense to leave me out. My aunt apologized, not just for the barbecue situation, but for years of taking my contributions for granted. She admitted that the family had gotten used to treating me like a service provider rather than a family member, someone who handled logistics and solved problems, but wasn't necessarily included in the celebration afterward. She offered to pay me back for the venue costs, though we both knew it wasn't really about the money. I told her to keep her money and invested in learning how to plan her own family gatherings. But then she surprised me. She asked if I'd be willing to help her understand how to rebuild what had been broken. Not just with me, but with the whole family dynamic that had allowed this situation to develop. We talked for 3 hours. By the end, we'd outlined a plan for addressing the family's communication problems and establishing clearer boundaries around expectations and contributions. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. The real test came that evening when my cousin called. She'd heard about my conversation with our aunt and wanted to know where that left things between us. I told her it left things exactly where her actions had put them, with her needing to decide what kind of family member she wanted to be going forward. She asked if I would consider coming to a makeup barbecue they were planning for the following weekend. I told her I'd think about it, but that any future family gatherings would need to operate under different rules. No more assumptions about who would handle what, no more taking people for granted, and definitely no more exclusions based on arbitrary criteria. She agreed quickly, probably too quickly, but it was a starting point. Final update. 3 weeks later, I attended the makeup barbecue. But this time, it was at my cousin's house, planned and paid for by the people who wanted to host it. I brought dessert as originally offered, and we all pretended the previous drama was water under the bridge. The event was smaller than originally planned, partly because some extended family members had taken sides during the 3-week gap and weren't ready to pretend everything was fine. The conversations were careful at first, everyone walking on eggshells and monitoring their words. But something had fundamentally shifted. When my nephew started to make a comment about family hierarchy, my aunt shut him down immediately. When my uncle began taking my logistical suggestions for granted, my cousin redirected him to handle things himself. The most significant change was in how people interacted with me. Instead of assuming I'd clean up, several family members coordinated cleanup duties. Instead of expecting me to solve problems, they asked if I was willing to help and accepted no as an answer. It wasn't perfect. Some family members remained resentful about the canceled venue, viewing my actions as nuclear retaliation for a minor slight. Others seemed to understand that the venue cancellation had been a symptom, not the disease, a reaction to years of being undervalued and taken for granted. 6 months later, our family gatherings operate completely differently. Responsibilities are discussed and distributed in advance. The costs are shared among people who can afford to contribute. Most importantly, invitations are extended clearly and directly, with no assumptions about who belongs where. I've maintained boundaries that would have seemed impossible before this incident. I help when asked and when I choose to, not because it's expected. I attend events I want to attend and politely decline others. I contribute financially to things I support and let others handle their own expenses otherwise. The relationship with my cousin remains strained but functional. We're polite at family gatherings, and we coordinate when necessary, but we're not as close as we once were. Some bridges, once burned, don't fully rebuild. My aunt and I have developed a stronger relationship than we'd had in years. The forced honesty of our coffee shop conversation created space for more authentic interactions. We have lunch regularly now, and she often asks my opinion on family situations before they spiral out of control. The most unexpected outcome has been watching other family members establish their own boundaries. My grandmother started declining events that conflicted with her schedule instead of rearranging her life for every family gathering. My uncle began asking people to contribute financially to events instead of shouldering all the costs himself. Looking back, I realized the venue cancellation wasn't really about revenge. It was about finally refusing to participate in a dynamic that had become toxic and one-sided. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop enabling behavior that doesn't serve anyone well. The $8,000 I lost was expensive, but it bought something invaluable: respect and genuine inclusion in my own family. That's a price I'd pay again without hesitation. These days, when someone mentions bringing dessert to a family gathering, they make sure I'm actually invited first. It's a small thing, but it represents a fundamental shift in how we treat each other. And that shift has made our family stronger, even if it's smaller than it used to be. Sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from the table to remind people that you deserve a seat there.